She lost her husband, then was thrown out of her own home by his family. But what they didn't know? He had left her a secret weapon buried deep in a drawer, one that would change everything. From courtroom battles to a garden grown from grief, this story is about a mother's fight to protect her daughter, her home, and her truth. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that stay with you long after they end. The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It fell in a steady rhythm, soaking the velvet lining of the casket as it descended into the earth. I stood there, numb, holding Emily's hand so tightly I thought I might crush it. She didn't say a word, just watched as they buried her father. My husband, David Harding, the man I thought I'd grow old with. The man who left for work on a Monday and never came home again. A heart attack at 45. No warnings, no goodbyes, just gone. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas and faces I barely registered. Condolences offered with tight lips and colder hands. People who hadn't called in years suddenly showed up to say, "If you need anything, just let me know." But none of them were there that night when I held Emily as she cried herself to sleep. None of them were there when the hospital called and said they did everything they could. None of them were there when I had to tell our 12-year-old daughter that her dad wasn't coming home. I just wanted to get back home, to sit on our old couch with Emily, drink hot cocoa, and pretend, just for one night, that the world wasn't falling apart. As we pulled into our driveway, the rain still tapping relentlessly on the windshield, everything looked normal. The porch light was still on, the recycling bin still out. David's muddy gardening gloves draped over the railing from last weekend. It looked like he'd just stepped out for coffee, like he could be back any second. Emily looked up at me with red eyes. "Can we have hot chocolate when we get inside? With marshmallows?" I managed a nod, though I felt hollow. "Of course, sweetheart, extra marshmallows." We dashed through the rain, her backpack bouncing, both of us soaked from the knees down. I fumbled for my keys, fingers trembling, not from the cold but from exhaustion. The lock was old, temperamental. David always meant to replace it. I slipped the key in and turned. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. My stomach clenched. "Is something wrong?" Emily asked, pressing close to me under the small overhang. "Just stuck, I think." I jiggled the key. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the curtains. They weren't ours. Gone were the linen ones I sewed by hand last spring. In their place were thick floral drapes with ugly tassels, like something pulled from an old motel. I leaned in closer, heart thudding in my ears. Inside, the furniture was all wrong. Boxes sat where our couch had been. My reading chair, David's favorite armchair, was occupied by someone holding a teacup. I stared harder. It was Margaret, David's mother. And next to her, adjusting pillows like she lived there, was Julia, his younger sister. My mouth went dry. I rang the doorbell, then knocked, then pounded. No response. Emily clutched my arm. "Mom, why is Grandma in our house?" I didn't have an answer. The door creaked open just a crack, the security chain catching. Margaret's face appeared in the gap, expression unreadable, voice bored. "Claire, I thought you were staying at a hotel." I blinked. "What are you talking about? This is my house. Our house. Let us in. We're soaked." She looked at Emily, then back at me. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." My pulse kicked hard in my chest. "Open the door, Margaret." "No." Her voice was ice. "It was David's home. Now that he's gone, it belongs to his family. You're no longer part of that." The slap wasn't physical, but it might as well have been. "We are his family," I said through gritted teeth. "I'm his wife, that's his daughter." "You were his wife," she corrected. I felt Emily's grip tighten on my coat. "Unless there's a will, the house reverts to his next of kin," Margaret continued smug. "That's me, not you." I could hardly breathe. "The house is in both our names. You can't do this. Open the door before I call the police." Margaret smiled faintly. "Call them. I have the deed right here. The mortgage was in David's name. You were just the wife." Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Emily needs her things, her room, her father's photos." "That's unfortunate," Margaret interrupted. "You should have thought of that before marrying without a prenup." A spark lit in me then. Not fear, not despair. Anger. Cold, focused anger. "You think this is over?" I whispered. "You have no idea what you've started." Margaret said nothing. I turned and walked away, Emily tucked under my arm, our clothes drenched, our future stolen. Back in the car, Emily broke. "Why is Grandma doing this? Where are we supposed to go?" I wiped the rain from her face. "I don't know, baby, but I promise you this. We will get our home back. We will not let her erase us." She sobbed into my coat, and I held her until the shivering stopped. Then I drove through the rain to the only place I could think of, Mrs. Brooks' house 2 blocks away. She opened the door before I could even knock, like she'd been expecting us. "Claire?" she said, eyes wide. Come in, dear Lord, you're soaked." She took one look at Emily and understood. We didn't need to say much. We slept on her fold-out that night. Me curled around my daughter, rain tapping the windows like a warning. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, and I was going to fight. Not just for the house, for David, for Emily, for myself, for everything that was mine. I didn't sleep much that first night at Mrs. Brooks' house. Her fold-out couch was lumpy, the blanket thin, and my thoughts too loud to silence. Emily was curled beside me, finally asleep, her little face pressed against my shoulder. She'd cried herself dry, and now there was only that soft whistle in her breath, like the sadness hadn't fully left her lungs. The house creaked in the familiar way old houses do. Somewhere the grandfather clock chimed softly, 3 a.m. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if David had known this would happen. He used to say, "My mother's not cruel, she's just controlling." But control doesn't explain what she did. Cruelty does. Locking us out of our own home the day we buried him. That wasn't grief. That was war. By morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight streamed weakly through the curtains in Mrs. Brooks' guest room. The quiet felt like a trap, as if the storm was just catching its breath before coming back meaner. I slipped out from under the blanket and tiptoed to the kitchen. Mrs. Brooks was already up, her gray curls pinned neatly back, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I put on a pot," she said gently. "You look like you need it more than I do." I sat across from her. "Thank you for everything." She waved me off. David was like a son to Harold and me. When Harold passed, David still came over every week to shovel the walk, fix the leaky faucet, or just sit and drink iced tea on the porch. You two were a family. That house was built on love. Don't let Margaret twist it into something else. I wanted to believe it wasn't too late for that. We sat in silence for a while, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen like armor. Then, as if she'd been waiting for the right moment, Mrs. Brooks said, "You know, Margaret came by the day before the funeral." My hand froze on the mug. "What?" "Boxes," she said. "She had boxes in the back of her car. I asked what she was doing, and she said she was helping you get things organized." "But you were still at the hospital, weren't you?" I nodded slowly, heart pounding. "David died the day before." Mrs. Brooks shook her head. She was already planning to take the house before he was even in the ground. The words hit me like a slap. It wasn't just a cold-hearted power grab. It was premeditated. Emily came into the kitchen then, her eyes still puffy from the night before. She didn't say anything, just climbed into my lap and laid her head on my shoulder. "We're gonna fix this," I whispered into her hair. "I promise." By noon, I'd made 3 phone calls. The first was to the funeral home, asking them to hold off sending the final bill until I could sort through our finances. The second was to David's old office, hoping someone there might have a copy of his updated documents or will, though I already knew the answer. We always said we'd get to it. We never did. The third call was the hardest, Lisa Chen. She was my roommate in college, now a real estate attorney in the next county. We hadn't spoken in years, but she picked up on the second ring. "Claire, wow, it's been ages. What's going on?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I need help, legal help." I told her everything. The funeral, the lockout, Margaret, the mortgage. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, Lisa sighed. "First off, I'm sorry. Second, she can't do that, not legally. Even if David's name is the only one on the mortgage, if you were living there and married, you have rights." "But we didn't have a will," I said quietly. "You're still his spouse," she replied firmly. "In most states, that gives you inheritance rights that override anyone else's. Plus, if you were contributing to the household, even if you weren't on the deed, you likely have tenant rights too." Relief hit me so fast I almost dropped the phone. "I'll need to see documents," she added. Do you have copies of the mortgage or deed? They're in David's office, I said. In the house. Lisa paused. Don't break in, Claire. I wasn't planning to, I lied. That afternoon, I stood in front of the house again. From the alley, it looked the same. David's half-finished birdhouse was still on the patio table. Emily's bike leaned against the back fence, a wheel slightly deflated. The rosemary in the garden was sprouting again. David always said it was the first to wake up in spring. I knew every quirk of that house, every window that stuck, every creaky floorboard, and I knew the side entrance had a faulty latch. David had planned to fix it, wedging a wooden dowel in the track as a temporary solution. If Margaret hadn't discovered it yet. I took a deep breath, slid the glass door open, and stepped inside. The air smelled wrong. Like lavender and lemon cleaner, Margaret's favorites. My home had always smelled like books and coffee and old pine floors. Now it smelled like someone trying to erase us. I moved fast, quiet. Voices echoed from the living room. Margaret and Julia, they were talking about furniture, replacing it. Margaret's voice was sharp, decisive. That couch is hideous. We'll burn it if we have to. I clenched my fists and slipped down the hallway. David's office was untouched, like a shrine. His coffee mug still sat on the desk. A Sudoku puzzle half finished, his handwriting in the margins. I had to choke back a sob. I went straight to the filing cabinet, the drawer labeled home, mortgage, insurance, property taxes. My fingers flew. There it was. David hadn't told me, but 2 years ago, during the worst of his business troubles, I had refinanced the house in my name. To save us. I'd kept it quiet because I didn't want to hurt his pride. And now, it was saving me again. But that wasn't all. Tucked in the back was a black folder. Postnup, do not discard. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a notarized agreement, 3 years old. David had signed it, spelling out in plain legal terms that if anything happened to him, all shared assets, including the house, would go to me, exclusively. Attached to the final page was a note in his handwriting. Claire, if you're reading this, it means my mother has tried something. She never forgave me for marrying you, for choosing love over her business plans. This should protect you and Emily. Show it to a lawyer. Fight if you have to. I love you both more than anything. David, I pressed the letter to my chest. Even in death, he was still looking out for us. Footsteps thudded down the hall. I shoved the documents into my bag just as the door opened. Julia stood there, holding a laundry basket, her expression swinging from surprise to suspicion. What are you doing here? She demanded. I stood up slowly. This is my house. She opened her mouth to yell, but I was already halfway down the hall. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her lips thin with fury. You broke in? I held up the folder. I came for what's mine. And this, I tapped the postnup, proves it. She went pale. You think a piece of paper will stop me? She snapped. No, I said. But a judge will. Then I walked out the back door, my heart pounding, my hands shaking, but my grip on the truth? Unbreakable. I didn't stop walking until I turned the corner at Maple and Birch, my chest burning with adrenaline and cold air. The postnup folder was still clutched against my body, shielded inside my coat like it was some sacred artifact. Maybe it was. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was David's voice. Reaching through time to pull Emily and me out of the quicksand Margaret had tried to bury us in. When I stepped back into Mrs. Brooks' kitchen, she looked up from her crossword puzzle, eyes widening at the sight of my wet hair and flushed cheeks. Claire Harding, she said, standing up quickly. What on God's green earth have you been doing? I didn't answer right away. I laid the folder on her kitchen table, slowly opened it, and showed her David's handwriting. The agreement? The note. Her lips parted, eyes scanning the page. Well, I told you I'd get us back in, I said quietly, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I smiled. Later that night, after Emily fell asleep in a borrowed pair of pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt from Mrs. Brooks' granddaughter, I called Lisa again. I got in, I said, skipping past greetings. I found the documents, postnup agreement, mortgage refinancing papers, and a note. David wrote it to me. He knew Margaret might try to take everything. There was a brief silence on the other end, then Lisa's voice dropped, firm with focus. Claire, this changes everything. I know. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Bring everything. I'll be there. The next morning, Emily and I stood in front of Lisa's office building, a 3-story red brick nestled on a quiet street in the neighboring town. Lisa met us in the lobby, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her in person, finer lines around her eyes, hair in a tighter bun, but her hug was warm and long. Inside her office, Emily curled up in a corner with a drawing pad Lisa had pulled from a drawer. Meanwhile, Lisa and I went over every page I'd brought. She read in silence, eyes scanning quickly but thoroughly, pausing now and then to scribble notes on a legal pad. After what felt like hours, she leaned back, tapping the folder with her pen. "This postnup is airtight. It's notarized, dated, witnessed. David signed it in full capacity of mental faculties, and it explicitly states that you inherit all joint assets upon his death." "And the mortgage?" I asked. She nodded. "Your name is listed as primary borrower on the refinance. It doesn't matter what Margaret says. This house is legally yours." Relief swept through me like a warm tide. "But," Lisa added carefully, "Margaret won't go quietly." "She already filed a claim, didn't she?" I asked. "She did," Lisa confirmed. "Petitioned the court, claiming undue influence and mental instability on David's part. She's trying to paint you as a manipulator who used his health crisis to take control of his finances." My stomach dropped. "That's insane." "I know it is, but this is about narrative, and Margaret's hired Martin Reynolds." My head snapped up. "Isn't he one of the most aggressive estate litigators in the county?" Lisa said grimly. "He specializes in overturning wills and postnups. He'll go after your character, Claire. Be prepared." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every moment from the past 3 years. The refinancing, the long nights working freelance design gigs to make extra money, the doctor visits, the time I spent hiding how close we were to losing everything just so David could focus on his recovery. I hadn't done any of it for recognition. I'd done it because I loved him. But now, every quiet act of love was going to be twisted into something ugly, into manipulation, greed. The next day, while Lisa filed the necessary paperwork to counter Margaret's claim and request an emergency hearing, I focused on collecting my own defense. I called David's doctor, who confirmed he'd seen David around the time the postnup was signed. "No mental impairment," he said firmly. David was clear, articulate, and very aware of his decisions. He mentioned his mother once, actually, said he didn't trust her with family finances. I asked him if he'd testify. He didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." I contacted 2 of David's former coworkers at the accounting firm. They both agreed to give statements, describing him as sharp, organized, and extremely private about his family life. One even recalled him mentioning a legal document he'd drawn up to keep the peace if anything happened to him. Then came the neighbors. Mrs. Brooks, of course, but also the mailman, who remembered Margaret coming by the house multiple times before David's death. "She looked like she owned the place," he said. "Even had a key." I even found a client of David's, a widow he'd helped with her estate planning, who remembered him talking about wanting to protect his daughter above all else. One night, while reviewing old photos on my laptop for anything that might show David healthy and sound of mind in recent years, I found a video. It was taken the day we finished planting the herb garden together. David, in his flannel shirt and jeans, showing Emily how to dig a hole for the rosemary. In the background, he was talking to me. Clear as day. "I'm glad we did this," he said. "I know my mom will have a field day if I drop dead unexpectedly. You make sure to keep the papers in the bottom drawer, okay?" I stared at the screen, tears welling. There it was, a voice from the past, casual and half-joking, but unmistakably aware. The next morning, I sent the video to Lisa. Her response came instantly. "This will help. A lot." A few days later, Lisa called to say the court had scheduled the emergency hearing for the following week. We would finally get to present our side. But Margaret wasn't done. That same afternoon, a courier delivered a thick envelope to Mrs. Brooks's doorstep. Inside were copies of legal motions filed by Reynolds. Margaret was challenging the postnup's validity on the grounds of mental incapacity and accusing me, Claire Harding, of systematic isolation and coercion over a vulnerable man. I sat on the steps holding that document, fists clenched. Emily watched me from the kitchen, her face unsure. I couldn't let her see me break, so I stood, calmly folded the papers and placed them on the table. "She's trying to scare us," I said, "but we're not afraid." That night, as I tucked Emily into bed, she whispered, "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" I sat beside her, brushing her hair back gently. "We're going to be more than okay," I said. "Your dad made sure of that. He knew this might happen. That's why he left us the truth. And the truth is stronger than any lie they try to tell." Emily nodded, her hand slipping into mine. I didn't know what would happen in court. I didn't know how far Margaret would go. But I knew this. David had trusted me to protect our daughter, to protect our home, and that's exactly what I intended to do. Even if it meant standing in front of a judge, in a courtroom filled with accusations and cold stares. Even if it meant facing Margaret and Reynolds head-on. I would stand there, and I would tell our story, because I still had my voice, and finally I had proof. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse loomed like a fortress. Pale gray stone, cold steps glistening from last night's rain. I stood at the base of those stairs with Emily's small hand gripped tightly in mine and Lisa's legal brief pressed to my chest. It didn't feel real, not yet. We were about to walk into a room where my entire life would be picked apart by people who had never loved David. People who had never known how it felt to watch him build a life from scratch, to hear him whisper goodnight to our daughter from the hallway, or to sit across from him on quiet Sunday mornings when the world felt still. Lisa leaned in as we climbed the steps. "Don't let them get to you. Reynolds is slick, but he thrives on emotional reaction. Stay calm, stay clear." Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one being called a manipulator, a gold digger, a thief. We reached the courtroom door. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed low and tense. Margaret was already seated with Reynolds beside her, tall, silver-haired, and smug in a $1,000 suit that practically announced, "I've never lost a case I could bully into submission." Julia sat behind them, fidgeting, eyes darting away from mine when I entered. Emily stayed with Mrs. Brooks in the gallery, clutching the sketchbook Lisa had given her. She was dressed in her best, a navy dress I managed to retrieve from the house during a brief supervised visit. She looked so grown up, so composed, but I could see the tight line of nerves around her mouth. When the judge entered, all rose. She was older than I expected. Silver hair in a tight twist, glasses perched low on her nose, eyes sharp as flint. Judge Carmen Harlan, known for her no-nonsense approach and intolerance for courtroom theatrics. She looked up from the file in front of her. "This is a hearing regarding the estate of David Harding and the challenge to a postnuptial agreement filed 3 years prior to his death. Miss Claire Harding is present as his surviving spouse. Miss Margaret Harding, the petitioner, is contesting the document's validity on the grounds of mental incapacity and undue influence." She scanned the room. "Do I have that correct?" Lisa stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "So do I," Reynolds chimed in, his voice smooth like butter left out too long. Judge Harlan nodded. "Let's proceed." Reynolds moved first. He began by painting David as a man in decline. Overworked, physically weak, emotionally isolated. "My client," he said, gesturing to Margaret with a respectful nod, "witnessed a stark change in her son's behavior during the final years of his life. Where once he called her every Sunday, he became distant. Where once he shared openly with his family, he became secretive." He glanced toward me with theatrical sympathy. This change coincided conveniently with his marriage to Miss Claire Harding. I felt Lisa shift beside me, but she stayed still. Reynolds continued. "We intend to show that Miss Harding exerted subtle but persistent pressure on Mr. Harding during a period of vulnerability, specifically around the time he experienced significant health issues, which she then used as a cover to refinance their home and quietly remove his name from key financial documents." He paused, letting the words hang like smoke. Then he added, "This case isn't about grief or loss. It's about deception, orchestrated by someone who saw an opportunity and took it." I clenched my fists beneath the table. My entire body was screaming to stand, to yell, to defend myself. But Lisa's earlier words rang in my ears. "Stay calm, stay clear." Lisa rose slowly. "Your Honor," she began, "we will present evidence, not speculation, that Mr. David Harding was of sound mind and judgment when he executed the postnuptial agreement. That he willingly and legally refinanced the home in Miss Harding's name during a time of financial hardship, not coercion. And we will show, through his own words and independent witnesses, that he took those actions to protect his wife and daughter from exactly this situation." She turned slightly toward Reynolds. This case is about grief and loss. It's about a man who foresaw that his family might turn on those he loved most and took steps to prevent it. The judge nodded. Let's see your evidence, counselor. Lisa called our first witness, Dr. Ivan Marcus, David's primary care physician. He was calm, professional, and utterly clear. David Harding was under stress, he admitted. But mentally, he was sharp. He had no neurological concerns. He understood legal matters. He discussed his mother, Margaret, and his desire to ensure his wife and child were protected. Would you say he was coerced? Lisa asked. Dr. Marcus chuckled. David Harding? No. The man was stubborn. If anything, I had to push him to take better care of himself. The judge nodded once. Thank you, doctor. Next came Rebecca Lang, a former colleague from David's accounting firm. He was meticulous, she said. Double-checked every client file. Didn't even trust me with the petty cash log. Was there ever a time you questioned his judgment? No, she replied firmly. In fact, I remember him saying he wanted to make sure his wife wouldn't have to fight for anything if something happened, said his mom could be unpredictable. Lisa showed the court a short video. David, smiling in our backyard, teaching Emily how to plant rosemary. In it, he says, half joking, if I kick the bucket, Claire knows where the papers are. Mom better not get any ideas. A soft laugh passed through the gallery. The judge didn't laugh, but her expression softened. Lisa rested her case with a simple statement. David Harding made a choice to protect the life he built. We are simply asking the court to honor that choice. Then, Reynolds called Margaret. She walked slowly to the stand, wrapped in black, as though still at the funeral. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she hadn't cried into once. My son changed, she said. He stopped calling, stopped visiting. Claire didn't like me. That part, at least, was true. Did David ever express concern about his finances? Reynolds asked. He told me things were tight, she replied. That Claire wasn't working, that he felt overwhelmed. And what happened then? He seemed defeated, she said. That's when she made him sign that paper. Lisa stood. Mrs. Harding, were you present when your son signed the postnup? No. Were you consulted by the notary? The witnesses? Anyone? No. Then how do you know he didn't do it of his own free will? Margaret blinked. Because he wouldn't do that to me, she said, voice thin. I'm his mother. Lisa's eyes didn't waver. That may be, but being someone's mother doesn't make you the author of their life. Reynolds had no more to offer. No witnesses, just Margaret's heartbreak and insinuation. The judge looked over her notes. This court will recess until tomorrow, she said. I will review the testimony and render a ruling. The gavel came down with a single definitive crack. As I turned to leave, Reynolds approached. He leaned in close, lowering his voice to a whisper. You think you've won? I met his gaze. I don't need to think. I have proof. He smirked. Proof is only as strong as the judge believes it. Then it's a good thing the truth doesn't need your belief, I said. He didn't reply. Emily met me by the door. Her eyes searched mine. Did it go okay? I squeezed her hand. We told the truth. That's all that matters. As we stepped into the crisp afternoon air, I felt the weight lift slightly. Tomorrow would bring a decision. But tonight, I still had my daughter's hand in mine. And for the first time in a long while, I had hope. The courtroom was nearly silent as we filed in the next morning. Even the creak of the wooden benches seemed hesitant, like everyone was bracing for something. I caught a glimpse of Margaret seated at the petitioner's table in her usual immaculately pressed navy suit, her pearl earrings glinting like tiny blades. Julia sat beside her, looking like she wished she were anywhere else. Lisa gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze as we sat down. Judge Harlan will give her ruling after final remarks. Stay calm, no matter what Reynolds throws at us. I nodded, but my stomach was a knot. I hadn't slept. Neither had Emily, though she'd pretended to for my sake. She now sat with Mrs. Brooks again in the gallery, her small hands folded tightly in her lap, her hair brushed and pulled back just the way David used to do it on Sunday mornings. She looked braver than I felt. Reynolds stood up. Your Honor, before the court concludes, we have one final request. We'd like to call Ava Harding to the stand. I shot to my feet. Objection, Your Honor. Lisa touched my arm and took over smoothly. Your Honor, Emily is 12 years old. She just lost her father. This request is entirely inappropriate and serves no purpose other than intimidation. Judge Harlan frowned, clearly displeased. Mr. Reynolds, I am inclined to agree. You've presented no compelling reason why this child should be subjected to questioning. Reynolds pressed on, his tone suddenly soft, paternal. Your Honor, the child lived in the home during the time in question. She observed her parents daily. Her insight could provide important context to the nature of their relationship, including any potential signs of manipulation. Before the judge could respond, a small voice rang out. I want to speak. Heads turned. Emily had stood up from her seat, her back straight, her chin lifted. Emily, I whispered, terrified, but she stepped forward before I could stop her. The judge peered down at her. Are you certain, dear? You don't have to do this. Emily nodded solemnly. I want to. Lisa glanced at me, hesitated, then whispered, let her. Reynolds won't know what hit him. Emily was sworn in with a simplified version of the oath, her small hand raised. Then she climbed into the witness chair, her feet barely brushing the floor. Reynolds approached her slowly, like a man about to cross a minefield. Emily, he began in a voice like syrup, thank you for being here today. I know this isn't easy. Emily didn't respond. She simply looked at him, waiting. I just want to ask you a few simple questions, okay? She nodded once. Did your parents argue a lot? She tilted her head. Sometimes. About laundry mostly, or groceries, but they always made up after. So they had disagreements? He said, trying to build something from nothing. Yeah, she said bluntly. Like every married couple on earth. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the courtroom. Reynolds kept going. Did your mom ever pressure your dad into doing things he didn't want to do? Emily thought about it. She made him eat broccoli once and go to the doctor when he said he was fine. More laughter. And about bigger things? Reynolds asked, eyes narrowing. Did she ever make big decisions without him? You mean like when she worked all night on design projects to save our house? Emily said, tilting her head again. Or when she stayed up late on the phone with the bank while Dad was resting because he was sick? I bit back tears. Lisa beamed. And did your mom ever talk badly about your grandma or your aunt in front of your dad? Emily shrugged. She didn't have to. Grandma would do that herself. Reynolds stiffened slightly. Emily turned toward the judge. My dad once said that Grandma had a way of making him feel like he owed her something. He'd get quiet after her phone calls. Sad. Lisa stood then. Emily, can you tell the court how your parents seemed together? Emily smiled. Happy. They had this thing. If one of them was sad or overwhelmed, they'd squeeze the other person's hand 3 times. It meant, I'm here. I saw it all the time. Especially when Dad was stressed. Mom would squeeze his hand, and he'd always smile after. Silence. The kind that hangs like a curtain. No further questions, Lisa said. The judge leaned slightly forward. Emily, thank you. You may step down now. As she left the stand, she glanced at Margaret, just a flicker of a glance, and then returned to Mrs. Brooks, who pulled her into a quiet hug. Margaret stared straight ahead, face frozen, lips pressed tight. Reynolds tried to recover with a closing argument that felt limp. He repeated the same accusations, but now, after Emily's calm testimony, it all sounded hollow. Manufactured. Lisa stood last. Your Honor, you've seen the evidence. You've heard from David Harding's doctor, his co-workers, and even his child. There is no sign of coercion, only preparation. A man trying to protect his family. A woman, my client, who acted with grace and responsibility through grief, financial hardship, and harassment. She paused. We ask that you honor David's clearly stated wishes and allow Claire Harding to continue the life they built together, free of interference. Judge Harlan sat in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. I have reviewed the documents and testimony. The postnuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. The mortgage documents are legal and reflect sound judgment. Margaret stiffened. I am ordering the immediate return of the Harding residence to Miss Claire Harding. Furthermore, a temporary restraining order will be issued against Miss Margaret Harding and Miss Julia Harding, effective immediately. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We're done here, the judge added. She stood and left the courtroom. Lisa grabbed my hand. You did it. But my eyes were on Emily, already halfway down the aisle, throwing herself into my arms. We won? She asked, voice trembling. I hugged her tight. We did, sweetheart. We're going home. As we walked out of that courtroom, I passed Margaret in the hallway. Her face was unreadable now. No tears, no fury, just a kind of withered disbelief. She leaned toward me, voice low and venomous. "You may have won today, but this isn't over." I didn't flinch. "No," I said, holding Emily close. "It's just beginning. My beginning, and you're not part of it." Then I turned away and walked into the sunlight. For the first time in weeks, it felt warm on my skin. The locksmith came the next morning, a quiet man with kind eyes and calloused hands. He didn't ask questions, just worked efficiently while Emily and I stood in the hallway, watching him remove the lock Margaret had installed and replace it with something new. Something solid. When he finished, he held up 2 shiny keys, warm from his palm. "No one's getting through this without your say-so, Mrs. Harding," he said. "Not even the Pentagon." I smiled, the first real unguarded smile I'd managed since before the funeral. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft but full of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. I closed the door behind him, slid the deadbolt into place, and stood there for a moment, my hand still resting on the lock. The house was ours again. It echoed a little. Margaret's floral curtains were gone, her overbearing perfumes already fading from the air, but it was ours. It smelled like coffee again, like old wood and linen, like home. Emily was already in her bedroom, unzipping boxes that had been returned during the court-ordered handoff. She moved with a purpose, her brows drawn in determination as she straightened her bookshelf and placed her stuffed cat, Marshmallow, back on her pillow like it had never left. "Mom," she called from the stairs, "can you help me hang up Dad's picture?" I climbed up slowly, still not used to the quiet confidence in her voice. I found her holding the frame of a photo I hadn't seen in weeks. David, arms around us at the beach, his laugh frozen mid-sound, his eyes squinting into sunlight. Our last family trip. I took the frame gently from her and hung it above her headboard, adjusting it until it was straight. "Perfect," Emily said, stepping back. "I want to put up more pictures of him, all over the house." "That's a wonderful idea," I said, and meant it. We spent the rest of the afternoon going through our photo albums, choosing which memories to bring back into the light. There was something healing in it, touching David's handwriting again, his little notes in the margins of photo sleeves. Emily's first ice cream face, Claire's famous birthday lasagna, the hammock collapse incident. I laughed through tears. That night, as Emily slept in her freshly remade bed, I found myself in David's office again. I hadn't touched it since retrieving the legal documents, but something pulled me there. Curiosity, maybe? Or longing. The desk was mostly undisturbed, though Margaret had obviously rifled through some drawers. I began tidying, organizing papers into folders, tossing out expired coupons and receipts. At the bottom of one file cabinet, nestled between some outdated tax forms, I found a leather-bound notebook. The cover was cracked from use, soft to the touch. Inside, I discovered page after page of sketches, garden layouts, soil notes, seed charts, tiny doodles of butterflies and bees in the margins. At the top of one page in David's neat print, a garden for Emily. I read on. Raised beds shaped like animals, a small pond, a bench made from reclaimed wood, lavender for peace, sunflowers for brightness, strawberries because every kid should have something sweet they grow themselves. My throat tightened. On the last page, a list: marigolds, protection; rosemary, remembrance; lavender, peace; sunflowers, joy; strawberries, sweetness. Underneath, a final note in David's handwriting: build it together, let it grow even when I'm not there. I sat back in his desk chair, holding that journal like it was a piece of him. Because it was, not just his plans, but his heart, his humor, his way of caring in silence. I brought it to Emily at breakfast the next morning. Her eyes lit up as she flipped through the drawings. "Dad made this?" "He did," I said, "for you." She ran her finger over the lines of a sketched butterfly bed. "Can we still build it?" It hit me then. We'd spent so much time protecting the past that we hadn't even thought about the future. And here it was, handed to us by David's own hand. "Yes," I said, and it was the easiest yes I'd said in months. "We're going to build the whole thing." And so we began. We cleared the patch of lawn behind the fence, marking out shapes with twine and stakes, just like David had diagrammed. We ordered soil and mulch, tilled the ground, laid down compost from Mrs. Brooks's generous garden stash. Emily named the butterflies that hovered near our work. She insisted we find the exact marigold variety David had scribbled, Tagetes patula. In early April, we planted the first seedlings. I showed Emily how to break up the roots gently, how to give them space, how to press the soil in just firm enough to anchor them. When we reached the center of the rabbit-shaped bed, the spot David had labeled marigolds for protection, Emily paused. She looked up at me, dirt smudged across her nose. "Do you remember that note Grandma left?" Of course I did. The one slipped under our front door days after the court decision. 6 typed words. "This house will always be mine." I'd tucked it in a drawer, unsure if I should give it to Lisa or burn it. "Can I plant it?" Emily asked. "Plant it?" She nodded. "Like, turn it into something good?" I stared at her, stunned. "You want to bury Grandma's threat under the flowers Dad said would protect us?" Emily smiled shyly. "Feels like the right place for it." I didn't hesitate. I went inside, retrieved the envelope, still sealed, still bitter. Together, we dug a small hole in the center of the bed. Emily laid the envelope in and covered it with rich, dark soil. We planted marigolds over it. Bright, blazing orange ones. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. We were growing something from pain. Not ignoring it, not denying it, but transforming it. Weeks passed. The garden came alive. Neighbors came by to help, to admire. They brought stepping stones, old pots, stories of David. Emily kept a butterfly journal. I found myself smiling more, sleeping better. Lisa called one morning with an update. Margaret's moved to Florida, filed paperwork to relinquish all remaining claims to David's estate. I sat on the porch steps, staring out at the sun-drenched marigolds. Just like that? She knew she couldn't win. She's done. I thanked her. But in truth, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. Emily and I hosted a small garden party on what would have been David's 46th birthday. Mrs. Brooks brought lemonade and cookies. David's coworkers brought lawn chairs and stories. We lit candles at sunset, placing them around the pond. Emily gave a tiny speech, holding up the notebook. "My dad dreamed this garden," she said, "but my mom made it real, and now it's both of them. Forever." I stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, heart full. That night, I walked through the garden alone. Fireflies danced in the lavender. The pond rippled softly under the moonlight. I paused by the marigolds. I imagined the paper beneath the soil, once a threat, now dissolving, feeding roots, becoming nothing more than dust. I whispered, "She can't hurt us anymore, David." And for once, I didn't need an answer back, because everything he'd left, the photos, the papers, the garden, had already spoken. Love doesn't need words. It just grows. Summer came slowly that year, not with fireworks and blazing heat like it used to, but with a kind of quiet warmth that settled into the bones, gradual, patient. The garden bloomed in stages, just like we did. What had once been patches of bare dirt and uncertainty was now a kaleidoscope of color. Deep purple lavender, bright yellow sunflowers, bursts of strawberry blossoms under lush green leaves. Emily and I spent hours outside, watering, weeding, watching butterflies emerge from hidden cocoons like tiny miracles. The more time we spent in that space, the more it became a sanctuary, not just from Margaret's shadow, but from grief itself. David was in everything. Every bloom, every smell, every memory coaxed gently from the soil. That summer, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop and updated my portfolio. I'd let my interior design work slip away during the hardest parts of our marriage, not because David didn't support me, but because life had demanded more of me at home, and I'd gladly given it. But now, with Emily older and the house finally ours again, I felt something reawakening, a creative itch I couldn't ignore. Within 2 weeks, I'd sent out proposals to former clients, friends in the design world, even old colleagues. To my surprise, responses flooded in. Small jobs at first, virtual consultations, color palette advice, layout suggestions. But the work came steadily. I started to feel useful in a way that wasn't just survival. It felt like building again. Emily noticed the change. "You hum now when you work," she said one morning as I measured fabric by the window. "I do?" She nodded. "You used to do that when I was little, when you were happy." Her words stopped me cold. I knelt beside her. "You know I'm happy now, right?" She leaned her forehead against mine. "I know, and I am too." We had our rhythm. Morning garden walks, breakfast at the sunlit table, afternoons with me sketching plans while she read in the hammock David had once nearly fallen out of trying to hang. At night, we'd light a candle by the pond and say goodnight to him. Not always aloud, sometimes just in our thoughts. Then, in early July, a letter arrived. It was hand-addressed, and the name stopped me. James Harding, David's father. I'd met him twice, once at our wedding and once during an awkward lunch when he passed through town. David had always spoken about him with a strange mix of reverence and distance. Margaret had gotten full custody after their divorce and had worked hard to keep James at arm's length. He lived in Arizona now, retired, and according to David, still mailed him birthday cards every year, though they only spoke a few times a year. The letter was brief but heartfelt. Claire, I heard about David from a neighbor whose daughter works at the courthouse. I am deeply sorry for your loss. I regret not being there for the funeral, but my health hasn't allowed me to travel long distances. I'd like to visit this summer if that's something you and Emily would be open to. I'd like to pay my respects properly. Yours, James. I read it 3 times before showing it to Emily. She furrowed her brow. I've never met him. No, sweetheart. You haven't, but he's your grandfather. Is he like Grandma Margaret? The way she said Grandma Margaret, with caution and a little bitterness, hurt. I knelt down beside her, taking her hand. No, I said. He's not like her, and I think he's trying to make up for lost time. Emily stared out at the garden for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, he can visit. James arrived in late July, stepping out of a taxi with a cane, a straw hat, and a worn leather duffel that looked older than me. He was tall, stooped slightly with age, and had David's eyes, deep-set, warm, watchful. When Emily opened the door and looked up at him, something passed between them. Something quiet and ancient, like a thread stitching 2 pieces of a fabric long torn. He stayed in the guest room, brought little, spoke softly. At first, conversation was slow. Emily was cautious, unsure of what to make of this stranger with her father's face. But the moment she showed him the garden, everything changed. James spent hours with her, asking about the plants David had picked, the drawings in the notebook, the colors they'd chosen. He sat in the garden's shade each afternoon, sometimes sketching, sometimes just watching. One evening he joined me on the porch while Emily chased fireflies. She's extraordinary, he said. She's a piece of him, I replied. The best part. He nodded slowly. You built something beautiful here, for her, for him. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I failed David, he continued. I let Margaret push me out of his life. I should have fought harder. You're here now, I said. That counts for something. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the garden breathe around us. James stayed 3 days. Before he left, he gave Emily a pocket-sized field notebook and told her to fill it with anything that grew, flowers, ideas, dreams. She hugged him before he climbed into the cab, something I hadn't expected, but knew David would have smiled to see. After he left, Emily placed the notebook beside David's on the kitchen shelf. Now I have one too, she said proudly. Later that week, we celebrated what would have been David's birthday. We invited neighbors, co-workers, friends, people who'd known him well and people who barely knew him at all but had watched from afar as we fought for our home. We decorated the garden with string lights and old photographs. Emily insisted we bake David's favorite cake, lemon with raspberry filling, though ours came out lopsided. No one cared. We toasted him at sunset, with iced tea in plastic cups and candles floating in the pond. Mrs. Brooks gave a short toast that made everyone cry and laugh in the same breath. To David, she said, holding her glass high, who planted more than seeds, who left behind roots. That night, after everyone had left and the last of the candles had burned low, I sat in the garden alone. The breeze was soft, scented with rosemary and marigolds. From the pond came the soft splash of frogs, from the fence the rustle of a night owl, and from somewhere unseen, I swear, a familiar warmth, David's kind of warmth, not touchable, not even visible, but present. I whispered to the darkness, "We're doing okay, love." Emily's smiling again, "Your garden's thriving, and I think I might be too." The wind stirred the sunflower stalks. I stood and turned toward the house, lights glowing softly from inside. The place David and I had once built from nothing, now standing stronger than ever. Home. And for the first time since he left us, I didn't cry as I walked through the door. I smiled. September drifted in like a sigh, soft, golden, and quieter than the months before. The garden had begun to fade at the edges, sunflowers bending toward the earth, lavender drying in soft tufts of purple-gray. The strawberries had stopped producing weeks ago, but their vines still curled like lazy fingers along the path David had once marked with chalk. Emily and I walked the garden each evening, our ritual now as natural as brushing our teeth or saying goodnight. She'd started 6th grade in a new classroom, with a new teacher who already adored her. She wore her father's old watch around her wrist, too big, spinning slightly with each movement, and said it helped her feel brave. One afternoon, a certified letter arrived, stamped and official. I opened it with cautious fingers at the kitchen counter, eyes skimming the type. Margaret Harding had formally relinquished all claims on David's estate. She'd moved permanently to Florida to live with her sister. There was no apology, no explanation, just the cold, clean language of legal closure. I stood there for a long time, the letter in my hand, no flare of joy, no triumphant smile, just a quiet exhale. She was gone. Later that night, I lit one of David's old sandalwood candles, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the garden through the window. Emily came in, her hair damp from her bath, holding Marshmallow the stuffed cat by one worn ear. "You okay?" she asked. I looked at her, his eyes in hers. "Yeah, I think I am," she smiled. "Good, 'cause I was thinking we should throw one last party." I laughed. "Another one? Didn't we just host Dad's birthday?" "No, I mean..." She twisted Marshmallow's tail and thought, "We should celebrate the garden before everything goes brown, a goodbye party for summer. For Dad." A lump caught in my throat. "That's a beautiful idea." We called it the harvest evening. No invitations, just word of mouth. Neighbors brought food, casseroles, pies, homemade bread that smelled like October. Kids ran barefoot along the garden beds, ducking between rows of now silent butterfly bushes. Emily wore her favorite dress, the one with embroidered flowers along the hem. She'd grown an inch since spring, taller and surer, though she still liked to sit on my lap when she was tired. We lit paper lanterns and placed them around the pond. David's journal sat on a display table, open to his sketch of the garden layout. Beneath it, we left a guest book and pens, inviting people to write memories or thoughts about him. By the end of the night, the pages were full. I stood by the trellis as dusk settled, holding a cup of cider. James had sent a bouquet of desert wildflowers from Arizona. It sat beside a photo of him and David taken on our wedding day. Awkward smiles, stiff suits, a tiny sliver of hope between them. "Your husband was a good man," one neighbor said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "He was," I replied. "Still is, just in a different way." Later, after the last of the guests had gone and Emily was curled up asleep in the hammock with a blanket pulled up to her chin, I wandered through the garden alone. The marigolds, planted above Margaret's hateful letter, still bloomed defiantly, bright orange bursts glowing in the moonlight. I knelt beside them and whispered, "She's really gone. You don't have to protect us anymore." And still, the petals swayed as if nodding. The next morning, I found a surprise in the mailbox, a thick envelope from the county's historical society. Inside was a request. They'd heard about the garden, the court case, the story of how we'd defended our home. A member of the board had attended the birthday memorial and written in the guest book. Now they wanted to include our garden in a fall walking tour of local places of remembrance and resilience. "Would you be willing to share your story?" the letter asked. I read it twice, then brought it inside and laid it on the table. Emily came down in her pajamas and read it over my shoulder. "So, people would walk through and we'd talk about Dad?" "Basically," I said, "only if we want to." She sipped her orange juice, thinking, "I think we should. I want people to know about him and about you and what we did." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who had grown through pain, who had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. "We'll do it," I said, and we did. That fall, on a crisp Sunday afternoon, people came. Some we knew, some we didn't. They walked along the mulched paths, stopped at the butterfly bench where David had planned the first sketches. They read the sign Emily had helped make, the Harding Garden, grown from love, loss, and legacy. We told our story. I stood beneath the archway of climbing vines and spoke about David, about Margaret, about courtrooms and marigolds and little girls brave enough to take the witness stand. I watched people cry. I watched them smile. I watched them linger by the marigold bed longer than any other spot. One woman, older, with silver hair and a cane like James's, touched the petals gently and whispered, turning pain into beauty. I wish I'd thought to do that after my husband died. That night, after the garden emptied and dusk fell once again, I sat at the kitchen table with the guest book, now fat with new pages. I flipped through and stopped at one message, scrawled in a steady, looping hand. To Claire and Emily, your strength is a lighthouse. Thank you for reminding the rest of us how to survive the dark. A neighbor you never met until today. I closed the book and looked around at the home we had reclaimed. It was filled with photos again, laughter again, morning coffee and misplaced shoes and half-finished jigsaw puzzles. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole. Emily came downstairs, barefoot and sleepy, and leaned against the doorframe. Mom? Yes? She yawned. What's next? I thought about it. We grow something else, I said. Maybe not in the dirt, but somewhere. She nodded, satisfied. As she turned to go back upstairs, I looked one last time out the window. The marigolds still stood tall, and just beyond them on the garden fence, a single monarch butterfly had landed, resting, unmoving, watching. I smiled and whispered, "We're ready now." And this time, I meant it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of Claire and Emily's journey. This story wasn't just about a house or a courtroom victory. It was about resilience, love, and the quiet power of standing your ground in the face of injustice. It reminds us that even when life takes everything, we still have the power to rebuild. Sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting, but from planting something new in the soil of our pain. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Your stories, your cities, your voices matter here. And if you believe in the strength of family, the beauty of hope, and the courage it takes to start again, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share heartfelt, real-life, inspired stories that bring comfort, inspiration, and sometimes the reminder that even in our darkest hours, we are not alone. Click the subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another story that just might be the one you need to hear. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and keep growing.